Greg Andrick here, bringing you another Business Freedom Conversation post. So I wanted you to see this editorial by Daniel Henniger because this issue is not going to leave us. The debt ceiling was only the start of it. We've got one side that wants unlimited borrowing. The other side is seeing the problem with that. So part of this is the shift, and we're having a huge population shift between the blue states and the red states. And if you have a business in a blue state, that means the tax base is eroding and they're going to look for you to pay more taxes. If your business is in a red state, what's happening is you now have a lot more people coming. There's going to be pressure on the red states because they need infrastructure. They need all the different things that are going on there. And you need to be prepared for what's going on. As it mentions in this video that's behind me, is that New York has lost 2% of its population, and it's the shift between blue and red. So what did Congress do? Congress passed a $370 billion climate change spending bill. Wow. The debt ceiling compromise was $2 trillion a year more borrowing for the next 2 years. And that's going to move the debt to 35 or 36 trillion. The debt is getting so large that rolling the bonds over or placing new ones is becoming increasingly difficult. So the 2022 gross domestic product, in other words, our economy, was 25.5 trillion. The debt is basically slightly more than 31 trillion. If we continue to do for the next 10 years what we've done the last 10 years, which is add 2 trillion in debt per year, we're going to wind up with 52 trillion in debt at 2033. And the economy, if it grows at 2%, which you know it's not growing at 2%, it's growing, well, actually in the last 2 quarters it's declined. But let's say it grows 2%. The economy will then be 31 trillion, and the debt will be 167% of our GDP. When you start approaching these high levels, I want to remind you that Argentina's debt to GDP ratio is only 85%. The debt is smaller than their GDP. Why do they have such a big problem? They can't roll over their bonds. They can't finance them because they keep defaulting. If we continue to borrow $2 trillion a year, when we get to 2033, the debt service will be 20% of the budget. The debt service at 5%, the current Fed rate. And they announced last week that they're going to raise rates, but at a slower basis. The reason they have to raise rates on a slower basis is because they're undermining the banking system. Currently, all of our banks are holding bonds in all of the markets, and they have a $2.2 trillion loss. It's an unrealized loss, but if there's a demand for the deposits in the bank, you see what's going to happen? It's going to make the savings and loan crisis of the late 70s and early 80s look like nothing. What happened there was they kept raising the rates over an 8-year period, and by year 6, they had eroded the values of all fixed interest instruments, and the savings and loans had such massive losses on their loan portfolios for housing that they started going out of business. Now, for you, the small business owner, the issue is in both type of states, they're going to be looking for more taxes because they're going to have to pay for all this stuff. And particularly, the federal government is going to be looking at more taxes. Can you imagine $2.2 trillion a year? That'll only happen when they roll all these bonds over, and a lot of the bonds are 20-year bonds. But that's going to be a lot of taxes. So take a look at this editorial. I want you to see it. It's becoming the debate of the future. Catch you on the next one.
Last, public spending is the central political issue of our time.
We walk away with spending cuts. We walk away with permitting reform. We walk away with work requirements. We're growing the economy, clawing back COVID funds, saving taxpayers' money, and limiting the growth of government.
The reason Joe Biden and the Democrats wanted to separate the debt ceiling from the budget is that uncapped federal spending has become a matter of survival for the entire blue ecosystem. Washington, blue states, and blue cities. If they don't spend, they'll die.
This is a bill that weakens us in the fight against climate change. It takes food away from hungry people. It makes students who are struggling on student loan debt locked in harder on making their payments.
On the Republican side of the debt ceiling fight, there was no serious difference on spending control between Kevin McCarthy's allies and detractors. It's progress that's also reflected among the growing list of GOP presidential contenders, including Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Asa Hutchinson, Chris Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, Doug Burgum, and Ron DeSantis.
The nation was careening towards bankruptcy prior to that debt deal, and the nation is still careening towards bankruptcy after that debt deal. It gives Biden $4 trillion of additional debt through the end of his first term and only term as president.
Contrast this with the narrative today about blue states and cities in the North and West, for whom the phrase du jour is doom loop.
California lost 300,000 residents between April of 2020 and July of 2021. New York lost a net 365,000 people, about 2% of its total population. Now, there is a continued shift from high tax to low tax states.
Unable to supply adequate housing or public services, the Democratic Party's most productive inhabitants and businesses are migrating to red states, fatally eroding the blue state tax base. What's left behind is a crumbling physical infrastructure and crushing public pension obligations, which will only worsen as baby boomers prepare to leave the workforce.
They don't have a big window like, say, Gen Xers like myself or millennials, and certainly not Gen Z.
On this vote, the yeas are 63, the nays are 36.
With the debt deal, Mr. Biden is being given a win for protecting his infrastructure legislation and climate spending. But while support for some infrastructure spending was bipartisan, what did Washington's Democrats do next?
The vice president votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
Passed without one Republican vote, a whopping $370 billion in spending on the climate.
Speaker McCarthy says he wants to limit, save, and grow. But what he and his Republicans really want to do is cut, gut, and slow the pace of the clean energy and climate action.
Today, the climate has become the Democratic path to further uncapped spending. Joe Biden said entitlement reform was off the table, but entitlements are untouchable anywhere blue.
I was born and raised in this state, and until the last few years, I rarely, if ever, saw a California license plate in the state of Florida. You now see a lot of them. I can tell you, if you go to California, you ain't seeing very many Florida license plates.
The offstage smackdown between California's Governor Gavin Newsom and Florida's Ron DeSantis is a useful spectacle.
The vast majority, almost the entire amount, impacted because of the visa policies in the Trump administration. This whole damn border debate is made up.
The 2024 election is about running the federal government on the red state model or blue state model, between making fiscal responsibility a national norm or extending blue bailouts until we hit